Now then folks, how are you doing? It's James, JT, at the movies, and I'm back for a very, very long overdue episode of Debriefing 007. I think the last one must be getting on for nearly a month ago now, so I'm going to be struggling to keep up to this deadline and No Time to Die, aren't I? Because I've got the rest of them to get through. But my apologies that this video's taken a little while to come out. If you've seen my last video on the channel, my DVD, Blu-ray and 4K update for May, you'll have seen that I've had quite a hectic work life recently, and also there's been a lot going on with my musical projects as well. But you don't need to worry, I'm not going anywhere, I'm back on it now, I have a schedule, and I'm going to be bringing a video out once a week, be it from this series or any of the other vlogs that I tend to regularly do on my channel. But without further ado, let us dance into the fire that is A View to a Kill. So, View to a Kill came out in 1985. Roger Moore was lured back once more to come back and reprise the role of James Bond 007. Again, the film is directed by John Glenn, and it's got the music from John Barry and a fantastic title song by Duran Duran as well. Starring Christopher Walken as the lead villain, Max Zorin. This was the first film in the series where they ever actually had to open with a disclaimer before the gun barrel sequence, as apparently the name Zorin, they thought they'd come up with it themselves, but it was actually really close to a genuine French businessman, so they had to put a disclaimer at the beginning of the film saying that the Zorin in this film was in completely fictional and obviously bore no resemblance to any real persons, living or dead. And I always found that little tidbit of information to be quite an interesting one. Now, in this film, Roger Moore he's too long in the tooth, really. He really should have hung it up at For Your Eyes Only, let alone Octopussy. Now, Octopussy is my favourite Roger Moore adventure, and I just love everything about that film. And you probably, if you've been watching this series from the get-go, will have got that, because the last episode, I think I went a little bit overboard, and I'm going to try and rein it back in again and keep this one to about 20 minutes, because I think we went over half an hour with the last one, and that's not really a brief recap, is it? That's almost a DVD, Blu-ray special feature length sort of thing. But yeah, I think Roger Moore should have hung it up definitely after Octopussy, but probably realistically after For Your Eyes Only. But he came back for Octopussy, as we know, because they were bringing Sean back for Never Say Never Again, and he didn't want to leave the Broccoli stuck introducing a new Bond when a rival company were bringing back Sean Connery to launch their Bond film. With this one, however, even though it's only been a 2-year gap from the last one to this one, Roger seems to have aged quite a bit, and the hair dye was really starting to show that it was hair dye, and he's had some work done to try and make his face look a bit younger, and bless him, it just doesn't work, and for all his best efforts, he looks older than had he probably left himself naturally to age. He's just too long in the tooth. And I mean, the opening, one of the opening scenes of this film is the MI6 regulars, where we've got obviously Robert Brown as M, Desmond Llewellyn as Q, we've got Patrick McNay as a guest ally, Tibbet, Lois Maxwell as Miss Moneypenny. This is her last film as well, playing Miss Moneypenny, and Roger Moore as James Bond, and it's like Senior's Day Out, and obviously, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's been some absolutely fantastic action adventure films over the years with, you know, senior-led casts, but bless them, that they're all a little bit too long in it at this one. With Moneypenny and Q, I guess it's a little bit different because they're supporting roles, and obviously Desmond Llewellyn went on to play it for another 15 years or more before he passed away. But with Lois Maxwell, they told her that she was too old and that this was going to be her last one. They were bringing in a younger actress from the next one. Seems a little unfair, really. But anyway, yeah, they're all too old for this one, and it does kind of play into it. You can easily spot the stunt doubles, and it just seems like a bit of a mismatched Bond for Zorin. Like, imagine if they'd have brought Dalton in, or even Brosnan, and put him up against Max Zorin, you know, Christopher Walken in his youth. I think that would have been a really, really good pairing. The basic plot of this film is that obviously Bond comes back from a mission in Siberia where he's recovered a microchip from the body of a fellow 00 agent. He takes it back to MI6 and they review it and find out that it is an identical copy to a microchip that's been developed for the British government to withstand basically like EMP attacks and things like that, and it's completely impervious to attack, whereas the common microchip found in the then modern computer, if it was subject to like an electromagnetic pulse, would basically wipe it out. And the line I think they say in the film is everything from our satellites to the common toaster would be rendered useless. So there you go. So they find that this microchip is the double of the one that's been made for the British government, which leads them to believe that there is a spy working in the organisation that's making these microchips. The organisation that makes the microchips is Zorin Industries. James Bond suggests that maybe Zorin himself, as he is of East German descent, could be potentially the spy, and he could be working for the KGB. The Minister of Defence isn't too sure, but M agrees with Bond's hunch and decides that the MI6 regulars should go and observe Zorin at Ascot Racecourse, as he's got a horse race in there. This was the scene I was referring to about earlier, where they're all dressed up in the finery, they're at Ascot, and it's one of my favourite scenes in the film, to be right. I love the first sort of 30 minutes of this film where we're, Siberia to London to Ascot to France. I love that whole run. I just think it's such a great little adventure, and I really enjoy all the characters and all the dialogue and everything. But anyway, they're there, and Zorin's horse, of course, wins the race, and we're introduced to Godfrey Tibbett, played by Patrick McNay, who's this film's ally. So we know what's going to happen to him. It's going to be the same as Luigi. It's going to be the same as VJ. It's going to be the same as Sharky. It's going to be the same as Saunders. Because in the John Glenn Bond films, there seems to be this sort of recurring theme that the Bond ally that's introduced, or like the first ally that's introduced anyway, sort of gets killed off as sort of like a motivational plot point. But there we go. So as Bond's talking to Tibbett, he's asking, well, is it possible that Zorin's using steroids or something to make his horse win because it's not a superior bloodline, and there's no real reason why the horse should win as regularly as it does. Tibbett puts Bond in contact with a detective in France, Monsieur Aubergine. Daft name that is. I don't know if that is that a common French surname? Have I just been really rude there? But it just seems like, because the character is very Clouseau-esque as well, and they actually cut out a deleted scene where James Bond gets arrested later in this sort of scene of events in Paris, and he's when he's sort of been charged at the sergeant's desk in the French custody, but the sergeant is basically just Clouseau. Anyway, that's a complete aside. Yeah, let me know, somebody down below. Is that a common French surname? Have I just been accidentally really rude there, or have they named the character daftly? Be quite interested to know. Anyway, Bond meets up with Monsieur Aubergine at the Eiffel Tower in the restaurant, and they're talking about how Zorin could possibly be making all his horses win, and sort of sharing theories and things like that over a nice bit of lunch. And then Mayday turns up and assassinates Aubergine with a butterfly on a fishing rod for like a whistling guitar nonsense show that's going on in the restaurant, some sort of artsy entertainment. Anyway, she takes one of these things and sort of hooks it into his neck and kills him. So Bond gives chase to Mayday. She jumps off the Eiffel Tower and parachutes down. Bond goes down, steals a taxi and gives chase, and ends up ruining a wedding, which is at the point he gets arrested. So M then comes out to Paris and gets Bond invited to, alongside Tibbett, Zorin's chateau, where he's having a horse sale so that they can investigate further, and he basically says, right, you've not to muck it up any further, otherwise you're going to give the game away, sort of thing. So Bond posing as James St. John Smythe and Tibbett posing as his valet arrive at Zorin's chateau, obviously under the guise of that they're wanting to buy one of these stupidly expensive horses, and the horse that we saw racing at the start of the film, Zorin's horse Pegasus, the brother of Pegasus, is like the prize of the sale, if you like. It's the one that everybody's after, and so that's sort of what he's turned up sort of under the under the guise of wanting to buy. Bond snoops around and introduces Zorin, and he really just can't help himself but drop hints that he's he's basically not there for what he says he's there for. He's like, oh, have you been interested in horse riding long? No, I had a dotty old aunt die and leave me some stables, so I thought it would be fun to raise horses. And it's like, even if that is sarcasm, it's stupid. You'd want to be nothing other than, oh yeah, I love my horses and I'm well versed in them and blah 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 blah. And then he's snooping around and he sees Zorin talking to somebody, a young lady who turns out to be this film's leading lady, Stacey Sutton. And rather than sort of watching her from a careful distance and observing her, he goes over sort of completely brazen Bond and, hello, I'm English, and almost like a scene out of a Johnny English movie almost, rather than a James Bond movie. And then that tips Mayday off to the fact that there might be something wrong with him, and so the security guys are looking for him. And then, like I say, he's having the interactions with Zorin and the other henchmen and sort of the other villains of the film, and he's just making himself really known. It's quite hilarious, really, how bad it comes across as sort of like espionage. Later on that night, Bond and Tibbett sneak into the stables where Tibbett had witnessed sort of a dropping floor into a laboratory earlier. So they manage to find that and find that Zorin is making and stockpiling a worldwide supply of microchips, but they're not too sure why. They also find out that through the use of these same microchips, Zorin's been able to inject natural horse steroids into his horses mid-race with something that's sort of implanted in the horse's leg, which is why when they've done drug tests to make sure that the horse hasn't been drugged, nothing's showing up because it's already natural horse DNA. They're just giving it a booster. So they find out, and that's really the end of the whole horse thing. And that was, I do quite like that was a clever introduction into how we get to meet this film's villain, because that doesn't come up again. Bond and Tibbett fight off some goons in the lab and barely make it back to the main chateau before all the gates are locked, as Zorin and his men are alerted to the fact that there's been intruders in the warehouse. Bond can't get back to his room, and so takes Mayday up on a joke he made earlier about being seen to personally, and is then found to be in her bed. And there's a really awkward love scene that ensues, and then Zorin knows straight away that this guy is up to no good. So he invites him to his study the next morning, and he's got this really dated, awesome computer thing where it's got like, it felt really at home in like Batman 1989. He's got like a camera through a two-way mirror that's sort of looking at Bond, and then Bond's sort of got like this, I don't know what this villain database is, but Bond's got this file on it, and it's like got his mug shot, and it's like licensed to kill and usually armed, extremely dangerous. And do you know what, Walken's performance in this film, we're probably only about 15 sort of 20 minutes in at this point, and it's absolutely fantastic. He's menacing, he's crazy, he's suave, he's everything you want in a Bond villain. He's sort of kind of Bond's opposite, which is just great. So they then decide that they're going to go and have a morning ride so that Bond, who's still posing as St. John Smythe, can try out the horse that he's thinking of buying at the stables. Of course, Zorin gets all his goons out, and it's just an elaborate attack to get rid of him. If I was a Bond bad guy and I had Bond there, unsuspecting, I mean, I know that the Stromberg thing didn't work too well because Bond clocked onto it, but I'd have a hidden gun somewhere in all that setup, and I'd just pick him off. The guy's rich and powerful enough that he could have carpet cleaners come round and clean that study out. But anyway, they go racing, and of course Bond sort of gets the upper hand and then tries to get back to the car which he believes Tibbett's driving, but it turns out in an earlier scene that Tibbett has been killed by Mayday after she'd hidden in the back of his car. I really liked that scene as well. It's horrible that Tibbett gets killed so quickly, but right from being a young kid I always enjoyed the scene where she's in the back seat of the car and they're going through the car wash and she sort of like comes over the back. But anyway, Zorin then sort of leaves Bond for dead in the car and does something that not many Bond villains does. He actually waits to make sure that Bond is dead. Now obviously he doesn't wait long enough and Bond's breathing from the air from the tyres underneath, but most Bond villains are like, I'm going to leave you for dead, and then they bugger off, and then of course he's alive the next minute, and more fool them for not checking. He actually waits around to make sure that he doesn't surface, which is actually one of the smartest things to date at this point in where we are in the series we've seen a Bond villain do. We then cut to a scene where Zorin reveals his master plan, which is it's lifted right out of Goldfinger. He's got all his board members and all his criminal masterminds round a table on his blimp, and he basically proposes to them that he's going to flood Silicon Valley, giving himself the monopoly on the microchip market. It's essentially, like I say, the Goldfinger plot from that film. One guy even disagrees, and he politely gets excused, only to be dropped out of the blimp in much the same way as Mr. Solo gets compacted into his car on the way to the airport. When they arrive in San Francisco, obviously they then set about the villains sort of getting Operation Main Strike, which is the whole flooding the San Andreas fault plot, which becomes the third act in motion. Bond turns up in San Francisco posing as a reporter and links in with Chuck Lee of the CIA to get a bit more information on Zorin. It's there that he's revealed that he's likely the result of a Nazi experiment, and it's why he's likely psychotic. So just a bit of background information about Zorin. Bond's also doing a bit more digging as to who the mysterious lady played by Tanya Roberts, Stacey Sutton, was at the party, and gets Chuck Lee to do a bit of digging on a cheque that's been issued to Miss Sutton from Zorin Industries. Bond then realises that she works at City Hall as a geologist, and again posing as a reporter for the London Financial Times, interviews the head of the geology department to try and get an angle on what Zorin's doing, and then also follows Stacey back to her house to basically introduce himself and try and sort of join forces with her. Stacey's house, she initially thinks that Bond is a Zorin goon, having seen him at the party earlier in France, but then after Bond fights off some actual Zorin goons, she realises that he is a good guy and that he just wants to help. So the pair of them team up and decide that they're going to break back into City Hall later that night to try and find out what's going on, as after a row earlier with her boss, Stacey's been fired. When they get to City Hall, they find Zorin and Mayday already there. Zorin then kills Stacey's boss, sets the building on fire, and reports it to the police so that they believe that Bond and Stacey are the culprits. After a daring escape, Bond manages to get Stacey down and then has an interaction with this film's version of J.W. Pepper. It's a sort of a cop that's the same sort of mould as the cop in Die Hard 2 that's played by Danny DeVito's cousin, and then he's got his boss as well, who's the one that hides up in the tower. And hey, Carmine, what sets off the metal detectors first? Is it the shit in your head, or the quote? Real sort of just Jobsworth copper. So he tries to arrest Bond. Bond escapes with Stacey in a fire truck, which is a really cool scene. And I must sound a little bit like I'm sort of slating this film, but I actually really, really enjoy it. I have a great time with it. They escape. They get to the San Andreas fault at the Zorin mine, and they infiltrate posing as workers. They then basically start the whole third act off with a commotion. Zorin's planning to blow the mine up, which will then flood the fault, but Bond interferes and basically stops that from happening. Zorin then escapes, and leaving Mayday to what he believes is perish in the mines. Mayday then has a change of heart, realising she never actually meant anything to Zorin, and then agrees to help Bond. Bond and Mayday get the bomb out of the mine so that it explodes, unfortunately with Mayday still attached to it, as it's the only way they can get the rail cart to go. It explodes outside of the mine rather than inside, foiling Zorin's plans. Zorin's obviously fuming at this point, and then Stacey, being typical Stacey unfortunately in this film, is screaming around for James on the hilltops. James, James, James! And so Zorin, as you do in a blimp, swoops down and grabs her and takes her hostage. Bond then grabs onto one of the ropes dangling down from the blimp and hangs on as they take a nice scenic ride through San Francisco. He takes in all the sights, Fisherman's Wharf, Alcatraz, just absolutely a real scenic thing. I really would recommend anybody do it. They then get to the Golden Gate Bridge, and the final battle ensues between Zorin and Bond. And it's a bit anticlimactic, really. Zorin sort of just almost seems to give up, really. He realises he's slipping and just sort of, and then falls to his death, and it's all a little bit anticlimactic. And then the secondary villains, Scarpine and Dr. Hans, the old scientist who we briefly meet at the beginning of the film, basically get blown up because they're a couple of bumbling idiots, and they set off a flare inside the blimp, and obviously everything goes boom. and Bond and Stacey are presumed dead. So we then cut to a scene back in London where General Gogol is awarding Bond with a Soviet honour for basically stopping this whole event from happening, but Bond is presumed dead. And then at the start of the film, Q gets like a little bit of a throwaway joke with basically a version of like K9 from Doctor Who that he's invented, and it's the sort of it's the latest in military surveillance. No, it's bloody not. It's a robot dog, you daft old sod. Anyway, they send the robot dog into Stacey's house, and of course Bond and Stacey are sharing an intimate moment in the shower, and she's far too young for him as a Bond lady. You know what I mean? She'd have probably been 25 at the time, and Roger Moore was pushing 60. I know that happens in the real world, but yeah, I don't know. One of them was horribly miscast, if not both, eh? But there we go. So it's a run-of-the-mill James Bond adventure. Now, if anybody remembers my ranking video, I ranked this quite high. I think this came in at number 6 in my, my sort of ranking of the series. And as much as this film has its problems, subjectively, I love this film, and I've always had a soft spot from it, right from being a young lad. When my dad introduced me to the Bond series when I was sort of, 7, 8, 9, 10 growing up, this was one of the ones, obviously, along with Licence to Kill, which is my favourite, that I fondly remember. I love the theme song and the music, and I love the locales. I think the villains are great, and like the scenes in, like, say, Paris and in San Francisco are really sort of scenes that were really quite vivid in my memory. And I just really, really enjoy the film. I can't really sort of tell you why more than that, really, on a subjective level. Objectively, as I mentioned, Roger Moore is too old. Christopher Walken is absolutely perfect as the villain, though he's completely underused in the film that he's in. Like I say, if we could have had a Brosnan Bond or a Dalton Bond against Walken in this film and made it a bit darker and a bit grittier, I think this film would have been up there with some of the best of the absolute best. And again, God rest her, Tanya Roberts, real shame she passed away earlier this year as well, but she was miscast as Stacey Sutton, and that character could have been really smart, brave, independent and strong, and they just make her a damsel in distress, and it's a real shame because she could have been an absolutely fantastic character. And if they'd have brought in somebody a little bit older, a little bit more again, sort of sounds like I'm speaking ill of somebody, but maybe with a bit more talent, a bit more weight about their performance, like they'd done with Maud Adams in Octopussy. I think we could have had a really, really, good Bond leading lady duo there. There's not much else I can say about this film other than that I really enjoy it. And on this rewatch, I did find it a little bit tedious, but that is probably because I've watched it twice this year, including this rewatch, because myself and my good mate Phil covered it over on our podcast, the Lost in His Own Museum podcast. We did an episode called Review to a Phil. I'll leave a link up there for that because it is here on YouTube, so I'd be really, really grateful if you would check that out. I suppose all that's left for me to do is to give this film a rating out of 10. On this occasion, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. So there we are, folks. That is my thoughts, my recap, my review on Roger Moore's final James Bond film, A View to a Kill. And before I wrap this video up, I just wanted to leave you with a little story that a friend of mine shared with me about Roger Moore that I think just sums him up as a bloke absolutely perfectly, and why, even though he's not my favourite James Bond, he'll always go down as one of the absolute best James Bonds in history. So it's a story from Mark Haynes. When he was 7 years old, he was in an airport and he spotted Roger Moore waiting for a plane. Nervously, he asked his dad to go up to Roger Moore and get an autograph. Roger Moore signed a bit of paper as Roger Moore, and the young Mark was really disappointed that it wasn't signed James Bond, as he didn't understand at the time that James Bond was a character and that Roger Moore wasn't actually James Bond. The young lad then went up to Roger Moore, sort of disappointed and almost wanting to complain a little bit, and "You didn't sign it right." And he goes, well, I can't sign it as James Bond because then Blofeld would know where I am, and he'd have an advantage on me. But don't you worry, you know it's me and I know it's me, and sort of give the kid a little bit of a reassurance sort of thing. And off 7-year-old Mark went happy as Larry with his little Roger Moore autograph. Flash forward 30 years, and Mark's working at an event that Roger Moore is attending. And when Roger Moore's saying hello, Mark reminds him of the time they were in the airport. Says, I don't know if you remember me, but when I was 7 years old, I asked for an autograph. You signed Roger Moore, and I was disappointed that you didn't sign James Bond. And Roger Moore sort of politely said, I'm really sorry, I don't remember you, but what a nice story. And then later on, as Mark was having a private moment, Roger Moore came up to him and went, of course I remember you. Blofeld's still out there and I don't want him to know where I am. It's great to see you again. Good work. And I just thought that was such a wholesome story. And like I say, just sums up what sort of a bloke Roger Moore was. He passed away a few years ago, as we all know, and he obviously had a good old life and lived to a ripe old age. But still a shame, as it always is when anybody like this that we cherish and enjoy passes away. But I just wanted to share that little story in his memory, and as we reach the end of his tenure of films. So thank you so much for watching, folks. I really do appreciate you watching this series. The next episode will be with us in just a couple of weeks' time. And the next 2 episodes are the Dalton episodes. We've got Living Daylights and, like I say, my personal favourite, Licence to Kill. At some point this week, I'm probably going to do a double bill after work of both of those films and then shoot the reviews back to back. So there shouldn't be as long a gap between the next 2 reviews anyway for you. As we do need to get a bit of a wriggle on, don't we, if I'm going to make it to having all the Bond films to date reviewed before No Time to Die comes out in the UK here on September 30th. We're now on the 17th of June, so I'll have to get my finger out, won't I? If you've liked this video, please leave me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below with your thoughts on A View to a Kill. I know this is a divisive film, so I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please think about doing so. I would love to have you around for a little bit longer, and if you do subscribe, ring that notification bell, and then that way you're the first person to be notified whenever I do post a video. And above all else, folks, as I always say, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care for now.